Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ask a Property Manager, episode number 8. Today's February 19th, 2020. Coming to you live from the Own Buffalo studios here in Buffalo, New York. I'm Andrew Schultz, principal broker of Own Buffalo Real Estate. We have an interesting show for you today. We're going to be talking about a few things. We're basically going to be talking about when Valentine's Day goes bad. We're just past Valentine's Day. So I thought the topic might be appropriate if you've got a couple that maybe things didn't go quite so well for Valentine's Day. Now someone wants to exit the lease. So we're going to be talking about the tenant breakup and when to remove a tenant from a lease and how to go through that process. We have a couple of questions out of the out of the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group. We pulled those from there this week. One of those is in regards to tenant-caused maintenance, and one is in regards to declining a rental application. We've got a pretty interesting show going here today. We'll jump over to our social media real quick. As always, new episodes of Ask a Property Manager are every Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Those are a live stream typically. Actually, all of those have been live streams, so you've been able to get on and comment during the live stream. We can answer those questions live typically. You can also follow us on Facebook. If you're watching us live, chances are you're already following our Facebook page. If not, the address is facebook.com/Buffalo4ClosedHomes. Please go over to our website, ownbuffalo.com, hit the link and subscribe to us on YouTube. We're still trying to hit that magic 100 subscribers number so we can claim our custom URL over there. Every subscriber helps. So if you enjoy the content, we do upload these to YouTube same day that we do them on Facebook Live. So if you miss the content, you can catch it over there, and please give us a subscription while you're over there. We really do appreciate it. Last but not least, if you're interested in a free 30-minute consultation with me, you can grab that link over at ownbuffalo.com. That is not a pitch session. I'm not trying to sell you on some sort of a product or something like that. I just like to make myself available, and if I can answer a question for somebody, I'll do that to the best of my ability. So let's jump into question number 1, or topic number 1, excuse me, removing a tenant from a lease. So there's a lot of things to consider when you're talking about removing a tenant from a lease, and the first thing that pops to mind is, should you even remove them? The tenant signed. We're going to make some assumptions for the purpose of this conversation, so we'll lay those out now. We're going to assume that there's multiple tenants. We'll use 2 for most of our examples. We're going to assume they're on a 1-year lease, and we're going to assume that they're mid-lease. So there is still several months remaining on the lease at this point. So as we're kind of going through the discussion today, keep those points in mind. That's kind of the reference point that I'm using. So removing a tenant from a lease. Should you even remove them? That question is one that really only you can answer. As the property manager, as the landlord, should you even remove the tenant from the lease? Typically, my answer is no, and I say that because our lease calls that all tenants are both jointly and severally liable. Essentially, what this means is that all parties are responsible for the performance of that lease, regardless of whether or not they're still living in the apartment or whatever the circumstances may have been. There's a breakup and one tenant moves out. By removing that tenant from the lease, you are kind of reducing the skin in the game. That person's getting to walk away from the apartment. Now you're left with fewer people that you can, attempt to work with if there's issues further down the line, such as damages at move out or something like that. Having more than one party on the lease keeps everybody responsible, regardless of whether or not they're actively living in the unit. And that's one reason that we typically try not to remove people from the lease. If it's a situation, where it absolutely has to be done, then we do have some policies and procedures in place to help us make this work as easily as possible. The first of those is, do the remaining tenants qualify? So if you have a boyfriend, girlfriend, a husband, wife, even roommates, and one of them wants to be removed from the lease, do the remaining tenants qualify for the apartment on their own, since they're no longer going to have that other source of revenue to back them up? So the question there becomes, do you have to go through and redo an entire rental application and income and everything else? It's up to you how deep you want to go. Typically what we'll do is we'll pull our original rental application if we have one, if it's not like an inherited tenant or something like that. We'll pull our original application and review the information from then. And then if we think that there may be concerns that there's not going to be enough income or something along those lines that would be cause for concern, a reason that the remaining parties don't qualify for the apartment. That's typically where we start, is with our old rental application. If you think that you may be in a situation where the person is not in a situation where they were going to qualify, either by income or credit standards or something else, at that point you're probably going to want to have them fill out an application as though they were going to be the new tenant for the apartment, almost as if it's a move out and then a move in. Get a tenant removal addendum signed. This is critically important if you decide that you're going to remove one tenant from the lease. It's important to note that everyone who signed on the lease needs to sign on the removal addendum. So, one person can't decide just unilaterally, I want to be off of this lease, take me off of it. No, you're on the lease with another person or people, and that is a legal document. It's a binding contract. If we're going to make changes to it, every person who's on that lease needs to sign the lease, the tenant removal addendum. Excuse me. Typically, you can Google one of these up on, just grab one on Google. Just do a quick Google search for tenant removal addendum. It's like an add drop form. They're not real complicated. It doesn't need to be incredibly lengthy or anything like that. One page, very simple form. One thing I do want to make sure that I mention, though, is make sure that the security deposit is settled. And this can actually be settled as part of your tenant removal addendum. Essentially, what you want to do is, since you're holding a security deposit, you need to know who that deposit is going back to at the end of the lease. If one person is coming off the lease, you need to know who's now going to be receiving that deposit. Is the outgoing tenant reimbursing the remaining tenant for the security deposit, and the whole security deposit now goes back to that tenant? Or, any of a number of ways that you can set it up, or that really it's the tenant setting it up, because they're the ones who are deciding, how to handle that particular portion. Do not refund any portion of the security deposit that you have on hand unless you're immediately getting certified funds to make up that difference. So for instance, if one party is moving out of a bedroom or something like that, maybe a college rental, and you have one party that's moving out, if you're refunding their portion of the security deposit, you need to make sure that you're still made whole on that deposit from the other tenants. So make sure that you're covering your bases from that regard, but don't leave the security deposit left unattended, left untouched. That is just going to create a headache when the remaining tenants move out as to who gets the deposit, how much everyone is getting, et cetera, et cetera. Your best bet is to specify it right in the tenant removal addendum. Then it's clear, to everybody who's involved what is to happen with that deposit, and everyone is signed off on it. So everybody is in agreement that that's what's going to happen. And last but not least, there are special laws out there for domestic violence and temporary restraining order type situations. These are going to vary state to state, sometimes even municipality to municipality. I strongly recommend that you just go out and research what the laws are in your area so that you know how to handle a situation like that in the event that it springs up. Generally speaking, the tenants do have a lot more legal rights when it's a domestic violence or a temporary restraining order type situation. So that is something that you're going to want to keep in mind when you're going through and trying to decide whether you want to remove a tenant from a lease. That's a kind of a little primer there as to how to handle the bad breakup when Valentines goes bad, how to remove a tenant from a lease the proper way, how to make sure that you're covering yourself and covering the security deposit and things of that nature. So that is a pretty nice little topic. It's important to cover that at least every once in a while. Definitely don't get blindsided. Have a policy in place for this and follow your policy. The policy is there for a reason. It's there because that's how things are supposed to be handled. So your best bet is to have a written policy that you follow each and every time. And then if you need to make an exception, then you need to document your exception so that you understand why the exception was made down the road in the event that anything ever is called to question. Let's change topics to tenant-caused maintenance. Again, this question came out of the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group. I'm going to read this to you as I enlarge the text on my screen here. Have you ever had to write a letter to a tenant about how their misuse of the sewer system created a clog, and because of this, they are responsible for the bill? Background: tenant has lived in the property 1.5 to 2 years, admitted to using flushable wipes to potty train their kid. Stop using flushable wipes. I have photos of the clog removed from the pipe and a wad of wipes around this about the size of a fist. You can see that on screen right now. It's pretty grody. Total charges just shy of $600 because the plumber had to pull the toilet, snake the line from inside the home, No locatable cleanout outside the home. House built in 1965 on a concrete slab. Just tapping to see if you guys have any professional words. I'm going to think on it for a night before I write the letter. Yes, it is in their lease that the residents are responsible for plumbing charges that are a result of their behavior. And that is really the first question that I would have asked, so I'm glad that you covered that. Your lease does permit chargebacks to tenants for tenant-caused damages. The way we handle this is very straightforward. We have a form letter that we use. The form letter, it's just a professional business letter. It states that, on X date, whatever lease violation was discovered, and as a result, or whatever maintenance condition was reported or discovered, and that is a lease violation. What I will typically do is I'll call out the specific section in the lease. I might even run off a copy of that page of the lease and circle the section that I'm talking about so the tenant knows what I'm referencing. And that's how we do it. It's just a very straightforward form letter. It references the date of the incident. It references the corrective action that needed to be taken. Weird. I don't know if you guys heard that or not. There was just a weird sound in the ceiling here. It references the what needed to happen, and at the end of the letter, it does state, this is a tenant responsible action. I would include the photo there that obviously shows, pretty clear evidence that that's tenant-caused damages. In the letter, we'll tell them you're now responsible for the plumbing charge in the amount of whatever the charge was. This is due by X date. Typically, we'll give tenants, some time to pay on the bill, make it due with the rent the following month or what have you, and pass that along to the tenant. We send it out usually just first class, and then we add the charge onto the tenant's ledger. Typically, what we will hear from the tenant is as soon as they get the letter, they'll start calling and screaming that they shouldn't have to be responsible for it. That's why you pointed it out in the letter what section of the lease it is that specifically calls them as being responsible. That's why you send a copy of the giant, the picture with the giant wad of sanitary napkins, or not sanitary napkins, flushable wipes. It almost looks like a rag or something in the picture with the orange bucket there. I don't know if that's wipes or if it almost looks like a washcloth or something. Anyway, but that's how we do it. It's very straightforward. Use a standard form letter, send that out. The tenant will call you, I guarantee it. They'll try to explain their way out of it. Stay strong. Obviously, you're not the one that flushed the wipes, and the tenant knows that, so they are responsible for that repair. Making sure that you do have, going back to the very last line of this, it is in the lease that the residents are responsible for plumbing charges as a result of their behavior. Everyone listening needs to make sure that something along those lines is written into their lease, so that when something like this happens, a tenant backs up, the sewer system or clogs a drain or something like that, you do have the ability to go back and back bill them for those damages. Next question. This was also pulled from the Rent Prep for Landlords Facebook group. Question for whomever can answer. I'm in Florida and have been taking applications for new tenants. I recently ran background and credit checks, $60 fee, on a married couple and found that their credit is bad and they have a lot of credit card debt and missed payments. Planning on denying them the lease because of this, and was wondering if I need to tell them why I'm rejecting them and if I need to send a rejection letter to them. Any input is appreciated. Yes, you do need to send them a letter. It's called an adverse action letter. And you should send this you have to, by law, send this to every tenant that you screen for tenancy and run a credit check on. When you run a credit check and then deny someone and use that credit check as part of the denial, you do need to notify them that their credit was pulled. The applicant has a right within a certain time frame, I don't know if it's 30, 60, 90 days, whatever, to request a copy of that credit report. Typically, they have to get that credit report from the agency that provided it. So for instance, if you're using Rent Prep for your tenant screening, you would put Rent Prep's name and address on the letter as to where the tenant would be required to go to get a free copy of their credit and background, or I think it might be just the credit that they're entitled to. And then, the screening company would be handling it from there. Some states, I believe California, I don't think this is a thing in New York yet, but it wouldn't surprise me. California actually has a law on the books that says that you have to provide the tenant with a copy of the credit report. There's a lot of controversy about that because it's basically directly in violation of federal law. It's also in direct violation of your agreement with your tenant screening company, which says that you cannot hand that information out freely. It's also a violation of the screening company's agreement with the credit bureaus because they have to be responsible for how that information is dispersed. So if you are not in a state that does not require you to give out the credit and background check, do not give it out yourself. Send them through the proper channel and let them get it that way. Don't wind up putting yourself in hot water over something silly like that. So adverse action letters, chances are you can download a PDF of this right from your screening company and just fill in the blanks. I use just a generic one that says we're not able to approve your rental application at this time. If this box was checked, your credit and background were pulled, you can contact this agency in order to get a copy of that. And we leave it at that. We don't specify, specific reasons for denial other than whether or not we ran a credit check. And then if we ran a credit check, that entitles them to be able to go out and grab their copy of their credit report for free. So guys, I do appreciate you listening here today. Thanks for joining me. Just to wrap things up, the next episode will be next Wednesday, February 26, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our topic for next week is going to be some of my favorite lease clauses and pre-screening questions. If you have a question that you'd like to see us answer, similar to how we pull questions from the Rent Prep for Landlords group, feel free to drop it in the comments below. You can also send us a message on our Facebook page, facebook.com/buffalo4closedhomes. You can go to our website, fill in the contact form there if you have a question that you'd like answered. You can grab the free 30-minute phone consultation, and I can answer, if you have a longer question, I can answer it in a 30-minute phone consult. I would, if you have questions, definitely reach out. We love getting questions from people because it helps us to engage with our audience. So definitely feel free to reach out. Let's see here. What else do we need to cover? I think that pretty much wraps it up. Head on over to YouTube, click the link. Head on over to ownbuffalo.com, click the link to YouTube, please subscribe, and we do appreciate it. Guys, thanks for watching. We really do love doing these shows so much. We get so much out of it, even from just talking to people who have watched episodes at different networking events in the area that I attend and things like that. People seem to really enjoy this. We're still tinkering with the format. I think I've kind of found the format that I like, but we do have some new stuff coming down the pipeline. We're going to be set up for call-in phone type shows, as well as like a little bit longer form interview style where we can have two people presenting on the same screen, which will be nice. So things are only growing up from here. Feel free to tune in next week, Wednesday, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on our Facebook page. Watch the next episode of Ask a Property Manager, and we will see you next week.